Shabbat Shalom. It's wonderful to see all of you here as we celebrate a wonderful bat mitzvah this morning. I've never really talked about this before, but I've got to say, I love bat mitzvahs. The whole event is so lovely. There's a lot of pink. Everyone's so happy. Everyone is so beautiful. It's not that I don't love bar mitzvahs. It's just that I have 3 sons, and I grew up with 2 brothers, so I've never had like a designated female event in my family. And I realized the other day I probably never will. I have one niece, and she just turned 13, and she's incredibly sweet, very, very kind, but oftentimes she doesn't know what to do with a house full of boy cousins when she comes to our house to visit. She was staying with us in March. She was trying to be a good sport with all of the boys just all over the house. But I could tell she was getting a little tired of being the only girl around, and I could tell that all she really wanted to do was just talk about something that a 13-year-old girl would want to talk about, but I didn't know what that was because all I know are boys. So I went into my wife's office. She was typing at the computer, and I said, "Hey, what do 13-year-old girls want to talk about?" And she didn't even look up from typing. She just responded immediately with Taylor Swift. No hesitation. Taylor Swift. This made me nervous, because I don't know anything about Taylor Swift. Like, I know she's like a person who sings songs. That's about it. I was nervous. I said to my wife, I don't even know what to say about Miss Swift. She didn't even look up from her computer. She said, it doesn't matter. And I said, what do you mean it doesn't matter? She said, just talk about Taylor Swift. And you know what, guys? It didn't matter. All I had to do was approach my niece and say, "Hey, do you like Taylor Swift?" And her eyes lit up. She did like Taylor Swift. It was like she had been waiting for years for someone to ask her this question, and she let me know all about how much she likes Miss Swift. I learned so much, guys. I learned about this thing called the Eras Tour. I learned about Travis Kelce. I learned so much about all of her lyrics. Mazel tov to me. I heard a lot about Taylor Swift. I didn't think much of this conversation. A couple weeks later, I was talking to an old friend of mine whose name is Paul. When I was a rabbi in Las Vegas, Paul was a congregant of mine. He still lives in Vegas, and he works for this huge live entertainment company, and he told me I could not mention the name of it this morning. But anyway, he was talking about some of the artists that he's been working with, and for some reason I brought up Taylor Swift, and I had told him that I had actually recently taken a class on Taylor Swift against my will, which my niece taught, and I had barely passed. And we laughed about this, and then he got really quiet on the phone, and he paused, and he said, "Hey, Rabbi, you want to know something really weird about Taylor Swift?" I said, "I don't know. How weird is it?" And that's when he told me the story. He said, "I work these really huge concerts in Las Vegas, and my job is keeping the talent happy. And a couple years ago, Taylor Swift was doing a show at our venue, and we had this big meeting with her security team beforehand to make sure she was safe. And they told me, this was in her contract, that she will only travel around your venue in a suitcase." I said, what do you mean she travels around in a suitcase? What does that mean? He said, "Rabbi Taylor is so famous that she can't walk down the street. She can't get from her car on the street to her own apartment building without being mobbed by fans or paparazzi. So what her security team does is she curls up into a tight ball And they put her inside of a suitcase, and they zip it up, and her security team rolls her around the venue to avoid being seen. And I thought he was kidding with me, but then I looked it up. Guys, Taylor Swift travels around in a suitcase, and boxes, and lots of other weird rolly stuff. She just has people carry her around in a box or roll her around like she's luggage. And he said, yeah, she did a show here a couple years back, and while they were lugging her around, an alarm went off in the building, and some mishap happened, and they forgot which suitcase she was in, and she was stuck in there for almost a half hour. It's okay, though, when she finally got out, they told her to shake it off. All right, Swifties. Now it's time in the sermon where I've got to talk about something actually relevant. So we'll keep Taylor in her suitcase for a moment. She won't go anywhere. Allow me to pivot to talk about our double Parsha for the week, Parshot Behar-Bechukotai. Now, the former Parsha is a portion that challenges us to think deeply about the nature of freedom, ownership, and dignity. The Torah introduces us to this very interesting and ancient concept called the Yovel, or the Jubilee year, which is supposed to be a time every 50 years when all of the land returns to its original owners, and we're told that Israelite slaves were to be set free then. Now, this is an intriguing notion now, but in antiquity, it would have been an incredibly bold theological statement. The Torah is essentially saying that no human being can truly own another permanently, because in reality, all people belong to God. Now, it is true that the Torah initially permitted slavery, but the rabbis suggest that this was only a temporary situation because the Jewish people lived in a world that was entrenched in slavery. I mean, history shows us that slavery in the ancient Near East was a widespread institution. Therefore, the Torah given in this context does not abolish slavery outright, but instead seeks to humanize it and limit it. The Torah sets time limits for slavery. In the book of Shemot and Exodus, it says, quote, when you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he must go free. As Jewish thought matured during the rabbinic period, the sages further constrained slavery's reach, and they ruled that hitting a slave or causing permanent injury must lead to emancipation of that slave. They placed obligations on owners to treat slaves with dignity, reminding them too that they were once slaves in the land of Egypt. Later in the medieval period, thinkers like Maimonides, the Rambam, codified rules on slavery, but also subtly pushed toward higher moral ground. He emphasized justice and the humane treatment of slaves, arguing that even though Jewish law permitted it, a pious Jew, he says, should go beyond the letter of the law. He writes in his Mishneh Torah, he says, quote, although the Torah permits slavery, the attribute of mercy and the ways of wisdom demand compassion. One should feed a slave before oneself, provide for their health, and speak to them kindly always. Make no mistake, Judaism does not endorse slavery anymore. But what about self-made slavery? Ever since Paul told me about Taylor Swift's suitcase, I can't get that out of my mind. It seems despite her immense power and wealth and notoriety, Taylor felt so watched, pursued, and commodified that her only escape was to literally pack herself away, to shrink her own freedom, to deny her body space and breath in order to control her image. It makes for a very interesting metaphor. Being famous in modern society often means becoming enslaved to public perception. So what can we learn from all of this? Well, Parshat Behar reminds us that true freedom is not found in wealth or visibility or in fame. It is found in the recognition of one's inherent dignity as somebody made in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim. According to the sages, the slave in ancient Israel was not to be held forever, not because of economic cycles, but rather because of a deep moral truth. We all belong not to each other, but to God. So friends, in that sense, I want to encourage us, maybe the next time we see a tabloid or hear a rumor about someone hiding in a suitcase, maybe we should stop and ask ourselves, what kind of world have we built when even the most adored amongst us needs to hide to feel free? Perhaps we should recommit ourselves to building a better world in our homes, in our communities, in our society. A world where no one needs to shrink themselves to be safe, where all can breathe freely, live authentically, and be recognized as being created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Maybe then our society can finally free the very people who feel enslaved. Now, friends, I want to say in conclusion that you may not like Taylor Swift. You may not know who she is. You may not have even liked the sermon, but that's okay, because as I have learned, haters gonna hate, 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 hate. Shabbat Shalom.